Thanks for joining us on the show, diving into all things people, power, and politics. This is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. We have a loaded show for you tonight and no time to waste. Questions remain months after President Trump's budget bill about how it's going to impact our pocketbooks. We have a money expert in to break down who wins and what you need to know. If you collect Social Security or have kids, you want to listen up. And that bill prompting major concerns because of massive cuts to Medicaid. Dr. Oz, who oversees the agency in charge of Medicaid claims, they're actually putting more money into Medicaid, but a Metro Detroit activist says not so fast. Dr. Oz is talking one-on-one with The Pulse in just a matter of a few minutes. Plus, Katrina Mineta on the impact she says these cuts will have and how organizations like hers are fighting back. We're being fair and bringing you both perspectives right here tonight. But we begin with a guilty verdict in the case of a man prosecutors say tried to assassinate President Donald Trump at that Florida golf club last year. Ryan Ruth facing life in prison after jurors convicted him on all charges, including attempting to assassinate a major presidential candidate. He represented himself in this case, but after the verdict was read, disorder in the court when Ruth tried to stab himself in the neck with a pen. He wasn't able to break his skin, and officers swarmed him and dragged him out of the courtroom. The judge will sentence Ruth in December. Turning now to the president's warning about pregnant women taking acetaminophen, which you probably know as Tylenol. The president and top health officials citing a study by Harvard University and Mount Sinai, saying there could be a link between pregnant women taking the drug and an increased risk of autism. Now, we should point out those studies were ultimately considered inconclusive, but the president still gave this warning from the White House.
So taking Tylenol is not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good. For this reason, they are strongly recommending that women limit Tylenol use during pregnancy unless medically necessary. That's for instance, in cases of extremely high fever.
Now, Dr. Abdul Al-Sayed is running for Senate, but we did speak with him today purely in his role as former Wayne County Health Director. He says the issue involving autism is extremely complicated, one that's been studied for decades. You know that. And he's concerned the White House is ignoring some of the science. Take a listen.
And what they found is one study that, or a set of studies that have looked at this question, and one that may have found an association that explains upwards of maybe 5%. But the other outcome is that when you tell people that that is the answer, that's it, you found the answer, and you use the bully pulpit of both the White House and the Department of Health and Human Services, it introduces both false blame and false hope. It tells people that all they got to do is just not use Tylenol during pregnancy, which there is no evidence to suggest can prevent autism.
I actually read that Harvard study. We should point out one really important thing. It actually states in the study that you shouldn't discontinue Tylenol, but you shouldn't use it excessively, saying that excessive fever could actually cause more damage to the baby. Now, the reason rates have increased, by the way, is also known as a combination of greater awareness and the newer wide-ranging spectrum used to diagnose people with milder cases of autism. But it is a complicated one, and it's one that you can't just figure out in 5 minutes. So certainly we'll continue to report on this one. Turning now to the president's so-called one big beautiful bill. It passed in the summer, but there's still questions about the impact it will have. We're starting tonight by focusing on how it'll impact your taxes and retirement planning. Financial advisor Sam Husko is with us here in Studio C, and it's always good to see you, Sam. Thanks for joining us here on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So here we go. We're going to be talking about Medicaid in just a moment here because we put the big beautiful bill away for a small time. But look, we have some things in it that we're very curious about. Not everything in there is doomsday. Some things are actually positives. And Sam, talk about what are some of those positive points of the bill.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say a big part of the market's strength right now is the fact that we got income taxes permanent instead of expiring in 2025. And so this is the first time that we've been able to actually speak on, hey, the tax planning that needs to be done before year end to take advantage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which I got to say, as a title, it has a lot more swag than the TCGA bill from before. So I think there's a little bit more special nature with it there. But with that, we're all squarely squirreling away our money in retirement accounts, whether it's traditional IRAs, traditional 401ks, et cetera. And I think we lose sight that the government gets a cut of that. That's all pre-tax money. It's easy to just think of it as the largest portion of it. But the government, which mind you is in debt and kind of living paycheck to paycheck, is going to get a cut of that. And, you know, think about it. If you were owning a joint investment with somebody and you didn't know how much you owned or how much they owned until you actually sold it, that would make you super uncomfortable.
Sure.
But that's what pre-tax IRAs are. And your co-owner of that is Uncle Sam. And so eventually they're going to want to take their cut. And what that does is create an opportunity to let a little bit of the tax balloon out of the little air out of the tax balloon today to help the future. So,
and we know there's benefits for people who claim Social Security after 65 in this bill,
yep,
and also child tax credits as well. But I know this is the first year that this actually will take full effect. But what makes today the right time for people to rethink their retirement strategies? Why is this the prime time for that?
Yeah. So I've been doing this 22 years, and I would say the biggest missing piece of people's retirement plan is long-term tax planning. And so with that, you think about the demographic. The sweet spot of people to look at things is pre-retirees till age 73. So we're talking like 55 to 73. And you think about it too, in their lifetime, Roth IRAs didn't become popular till like 2010.
Sure.
So by the time that came out, they already were in high tax brackets and they didn't see the value of putting more into it. And so with that, you've got to understand that there's these big tax time bombs filling up in the baby boom generation that will come due at age 73 unless they do something about it today.
So what about those people who are younger than 55 or let's say older than 73?
Yeah. I mean, under 55, you know, there's things you can do, but hopefully you have enough of a runway to, at retirement, get half of your accounts in taxable and half in non-taxable or tax-free. And then you won't have the same big tax balloon that the boomers have. And so what you could do is the mega backdoor Roth strategy. That's an advanced strategy to get a little bit more in that has some income phase-out options. Another easy thing for young people is just asset location. I mean, take a page from the book of Peter Thiel. He put all his most aggressive investments in his Roth, which is now worth $5 billion tax-free, ruining it for the rest of us potentially. But that location has mean that he's got a huge account that's completely outside of the government's purview.
And so when you look at this particular bill, what would you say, who would you say is going to be the biggest beneficiary of it?
The biggest beneficiary is investors and just the people, I'd say, in general, because I'd say the biggest part of it is just that ordinary income tax is permanent law moving forward. But I would remind you, I mean, the last time I was on here, we were talking TCJA. Now we're talking this new bill. Tax law is written in pencil, not in ink. And so there will be a new tax bill 10 years from now. I know people like that concept of permanence, but it's not permanent. And so what will happen is it will change in the future. So I would encourage and urge people to have tax diversification along with their investment strategy too. So have, you know, be prepared for the unpredictions and hedge for what could be the future in taxes as well too.
Easy for you to say. You know what? Easy for you to say. Sam Husko, it is good to see you. Thanks for joining us with SGH Wealth Management in Lathrop Village. Always good to have you on the show. Thanks for explaining some of this to our audience. Obviously, we have concerns over this bill as well. Of course, Medicaid cuts. So many people talking about that. Administrator Dr. Mehmet Oz on why he feels the concerns are overblown. Next, and later why a Metro Detroit advocate says real people will be harmed. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. We're so glad to be joining us today, the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, a stranger to nobody in America, Dr. Mehmet Oz. And Dr. Oz, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse tonight.
Well, thanks for having me on. Lots to talk about.
You know, we do. In fact, and we only have a few minutes, so we'll get right to it. And as a former TV guy yourself, you know how the importance of time is. So we'll get right into it. I do want to ask you, this is a huge, bold initiative, $50 billion that goes to help rural health care. Talk to the people here in rural Michigan who may be watching this show, who were concerned when they first heard about the big, beautiful bill and the risk that rural health care was put at.
The most important thing that we wanted to do with the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is the Working Families Tax Cut legislation, was to try to take the clock back about 5 years to before the pandemic, so we could actually assume the same status we had before the virus hit our shores, which was a fairly sustainable program for Medicaid. But many of the changes that happened during the pandemic made the program sick, so sick that we were worried about it. We wanted to save Medicaid, so we made some difficult choices. In that mix, however, was the reality that rural health care, independent of all that, is having trouble. There's 20% higher incidence of chronic illness, a significant higher increase of suicides and maternal mortality rates, and the life expectancy in rural Michigan and other parts of the country roughly 3 years shorter than in urban parts of the country. So we wanted to make a move in this area. The president and Congress wisely said, instead of trying to put a Band-Aid on a hemorrhaging artery, let's make a massive investment in the rural healthcare system that's large enough that we can actually transform it, make it healthy, allow it to be sustained long after the money has been doled out. So the decision was made to put $50 billion over 5 years into rural America. That's $10 billion a year, which is 50% more than we currently spend in rural healthcare through Medicaid in America. This has to be, however, given out to each state through their governor. And it is a wise move. The president understands that the governors understand their states more than anybody else.
Sure.
And so I spoke to Governor Whitmer, for example. I spoke to 40 out of the 50 governors. I'm going to get to them all to emphasize how important an opportunity this is. It's a space shot. If we can fix rural healthcare with some of the things we're going to talk about in this interview, those same tools can also help us in urban healthcare. But now we have an opportunity to work out some of the kinks to make sure that we're tidy and can make this happen.
Dr. Oz, and I understand that this is supposed to be the shot in the arm that helps rural health care, but as you know, the conversations that so many of us journalists have had with rural health care facilities in Michigan has been true concern about Medicaid cuts and what could happen to those facilities already. Is this, in turn, a solution to that problem, or is this on top of the concerns that people already have about that bill?
This is a much bigger opportunity for us. Rural health care is sick already, independent of any new bills. Even with all the huge amount of money that poured into Medicaid, 50% increase in spending in the last 5 years. You can't spend more money than on a program. Despite all that, 40% of rural health care systems in America are on financial distress. That's on life support in some cases. They have half the occupancy of urban areas. They're just not able to keep up because you have to make investments in healthcare. And if you don't have people in the hospital, and often some of these hospitals will have 1, 2, 3 people in the hospital, it's difficult for them to figure out how to best care for patients so people in their own communities drive by those hospitals. So this is a bigger opportunity, but a bigger problem as well. So moving into the future, we decided, let's make a large investment. I'm going to say this again. The amount of money is 50% more than is currently given to these hospitals. This is not a rounding error. It's a massive increase in investment in rural health care, but if you're going to use that money wisely, you can't just pay off old bills. You got to figure out how to right-size the system, how to get the right manpower in place, how do you train the right nurses and make them stay there by giving them opportunities, how do you get doctors in these rural areas, what are you going to do about information technology? The big urban hospitals, I've been through all through Michigan, you've got fantastic hospital systems in Ann Arbor, Detroit, et cetera. They invest a lot of money on infrastructure, especially IT infrastructure. So they got top-notch electronic medical records. They have ways for you to digitally interact with them. That does not exist in many rural institutions. We want to build that with this money. Once they have it, they can compete.
Dr. Oz, the concern that so many people have also is not just the work requirements that we're talking about, because that's one aspect of this. There are those out there who have facilities that I've talked to here in Metro Detroit who are concerned that the funding to not the rural, but the regular facilities, the nursing homes, the areas where they get Medicaid money, could somehow be compromised so that they won't have the same quality of care for their loved ones. Are you concerned about anyone kind of slipping through the cracks when it comes to that?
You've used the word cut several times. I just want to clarify this. We're actually putting more money into Medicaid, not less. We're going to spend $200 billion more dollars. So it's hard to argue that we're reducing spending. This is not disputable. Everyone agrees we're putting more money in. The question is, how do you provide care in a way that's sustainable? And the way this has worked generally, and this is based on what happened 60 years ago when Medicaid was created, there was a desire to take care of people at the dawn of their life, the children, those at the twilight of their life, the seniors, and those in the shadows. bills. People who are having trouble needed help. It was not designed for able-bodied individuals. If you start putting a lot of people into Medicaid for free health care that aren't supposed to be there, you'll end up with lots of problems because you can't keep up to take care of the people you originally designed the program for. Plus, you had a ton of fraud, waste, and abuse. We think about $15 billion worth last year alone. So to deal with these problems, the One Big Beautiful Bill put in place provisions to reduce some of the changes and the fraud that those changes allowed that have taken place over the last few years. I want to reemphasize this. The hospital systems were working okay before the pandemic. They will work okay in the future. What we're doing is taking back some of the things that were added on because of the wartime situation that the pandemic created. And you touched on the work requirement. I'm going to get into this. Is a really important issue. At no time at any point when Medicaid was being created did anyone envision people who are able-bodied and able to, for that reason, go to work be on Medicaid. In fact, when President Clinton put the work requirement into the welfare program in the 1990s when he was president, that was, for many people, controversial. It turned out to be a brilliant move. People have applauded it decades later. President Obama said you had to have a work requirement for any kind of a social safety net program. President Biden said that too. Now, all the Republican presidents have been saying it all along as well, but when both parties are saying the same thing and we actually do it, we should be applauded, not criticized. The average person who's able-bodied doesn't want to stay at home. They want to go to work. We're going to help them get out of the house, get back to work, begin contributing to society in ways that they know they were destined to do.
Dr. Oz, this is about a $50 billion boost, and I understand what you're saying, and I thank you very much. I know it's a complicated topic, but one that you say is pretty clear when it comes to this particular piece, a $50 billion boost to rural hospitals. And obviously, we're going to be talking to our governor about how that money will be used and how that process is going to go. But Dr. Oz, we thank you for your time here on The Pulse.
God bless you. Take care.
All right. Well, you know, some people say $50 billion simply isn't enough, given the shortfall of $120 billion that rural hospitals will feel. We're keeping this conversation going with activist Katrina Mineta, the other perspective of this topic, the harm she says will be done and how organizations like hers are fighting back. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This is The Pulse. Look, when we say we're fair, we give you all perspectives. You heard from a financial planner who says, look, in this budget bill, there are some good things. Social Security, there's child tax credits, there's all kinds of stuff. But in this bill, of course, so much of what has been talked about is about Medicaid cuts, and for good reason. Katrina Mineta is the co-founder of Macomb Defenders Rising, an advocacy group that really is looking out for people when it comes to these cuts and what people should know. And so, yes, you heard from Dr. Oz. Now you're going to hear from someone who says, maybe the $50 billion for rural hospitals isn't good enough. And Katrina, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
Good to see you as well.
So when we hear the Trump administration, and you heard Dr. Oz here on The Pulse say, hey, $50 billion, it sounds like a really big check, and it is. But is it enough for rural hospitals?
I don't think so. So $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid for the entire federal budget, but in rural areas specifically, that'll be $137 billion in cuts. So yeah, they're subsidizing a bit by putting in $50 billion more, but that's a 60% loss that we need to make up for.
So you're saying that there's $137 billion in rural hospital cuts, and this, what Dr. Oz just talked about on this broadcast, was $50 billion to take care of some of it. Will that help a little bit?
Well, there's a math problem, right?
Right.
There's a 60% loss. So people are still going to lose services. I don't know where you're going to make up that loss, but that's the issue we're dealing with here.
I do want to ask you about how that loss is made up for. So we'll talk about work requirements in a minute, because people get confused about what this is all about. Right now, we're just talking about the cuts in general. When you make cuts to rural health care, what does that look like for a rural hospital? So
rural areas are largely lower income. There's not a lot of job opportunities in rural areas, right? There's not a big city center. Most of the jobs are from medical centers, hospitals, et cetera. So people that are going to the hospital in rural areas, they are low income. They need Medicaid. Actually, 1 in 4 people in rural areas are on Medicaid. So when they get their services taken away from them, how do they get their health care, right? So the problem we're seeing is that people don't get health care. They don't want to go into debt. They're afraid to go to the hospital. So now they are not getting their preventative care, and then they only go when they need emergency care. Well, hospitals still need to give people emergency care, right? So Now the hospitals are picking up the costs for the services that are rendered, and now the cost gets set on to you and me, the hospitals, to raise costs, or the hospitals have to shut down. There's 3 hospitals in Michigan right now that are at risk of closing.
Yeah, and we've reported on those 3 hospitals in rural areas here. I do want to ask you about what Governor Whitmer has been pleading with the president about. She went to the White House not long ago. We reported it on the Pulse, and people have a hard time reconciling that Governor Whitmer actually tries to go and sit with the president. Some Democrats don't like that. Some Republicans don't like Whitmer, but she's talked to him, and she literally asked him, hey, Mr. President, you need to give us more time. 2026 isn't going to work for us. We can't handle this. First of all, is she right? And secondly, do you believe that giving more time to people would be helpful?
I'm not sure about giving more time, because right now what we're seeing is people are really scared. There's a lot of limbo. No one really knows what's happening, what's going on. So the fears are high. I talked with a woman today. Her name's Karen. She has a daughter named Allison. Allison's 34. She needs 24/7 medical care. She's very sick. And Karen doesn't know in this interim time what's going to happen. Am I going to get Medicaid for my daughter? Am I going to get cut? How am I going to, how is she going to pay for the services that they need?
Katrina, when someone is really in need of Medicaid, you believe that in this budget bill, some vulnerable people who deserve Medicaid will be cut?
Absolutely.
You think that woman and her daughter would be cut?
I don't know about that woman specifically, but people do get cut. It's been proven over and over and over again. Every time there's cuts to Medicaid, even when worker requirements are instilled, people get dropped. When Medicaid is expanded, more people get Medicaid. When Medicaid is reduced, people lose coverage. People, deserving people that are working, lose coverage.
Yeah, it's so interesting because Governor Rick Snyder, a very conservative Republican governor here who was very solution-oriented, actually passed the torch to Governor Whitmer to say, hey, let's work on Medicaid to make it more accessible to everybody. And that's what I find interesting, is that Whitmer and Snyder worked together on this, yet we have this issue that we're facing now. President Clinton did, though, put a lot of work requirements in. President Biden also talked about that. President Obama talked about the work requirements. And there's video of them saying work requirements are important. We need to empower people. Why is it different when this administration says it to you?
Well, because here's the thing. I think there's a narrative getting sold in the American system right now that some people are worthy and some people aren't worthy. That's not really what democracy is about. Democracy is about, equal rights. Everybody that sets foot in America is supposed to have the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Medicaid gives you the opportunity to have life. So in my mind, it's not about who's deserving, who's not. But when we know that 60% of people on Medicaid are already working. That comes out of the Kaiser Family Foundation, which is a public health policy research organization. They are nonpartisan. Actually, my Republican lawmaker, their staff gave me this information.
And what's the information again? Yeah.
It's 60% of people on Medicaid are already working. Actually, in Michigan, it's 70% of people on Medicaid are already working.
So there's this very, but Facebook type thing to do, this social media thing to do, which is all these people want to just do is collect money and collect benefits, and all they want to do is sit at home. That couldn't be more inaccurate, according to the Kaiser Foundation, which indicates that most of the vast majority of people are working.
Yeah, the other people are disabled. They're in a nursing home, they're elderly, they're retired, or they're children and students. So, this is just, it's nonsense.
Well, look, the rural hospitals are filled with people who voted for both President Trump and President Biden before that, and of course for Harris. This is not a political issue when it comes down to how we should care for our people in our communities. So let's hope we come to an answer soon. And I just want to thank you for adding to the perspective. Dr. Oz and then Katrina Mineta, it's good to see you both.
It's great to see you.
Thanks for joining us. That is the Pulse for tonight. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was great to be with you.